all for coming. This is such an exciting moment in time for us all to be together at this launch. As Reem said, Damouni comes from the town Damoun, which is in the Galilee, where our most impactful person in all of our history came from, a man from Galilee. I'd like to share a few words on my experience as a Palestinian growing up in Australia, and on solidarity and the message that I believe that we should be sending together to not just Australia, but to the whole world. When I grew up here in school, I would be often having barbecues and stuff with friends and social gatherings. And it struck me when a friend asked me one time while I was having a beer with my meal, he came up to me and he said, "Oh, Jason, I thought it was against your religion to drink alcohol." And I said, how do you mean? He said, "Oh, isn't it against Islam to drink alcohol?" I said, "Yes, but I'm not a Muslim." The question that followed him after that, he said, "Oh, I didn't realize that you were a Christian. When did your family convert?" And I said to him, 2,000 years ago, buddy. That's when we became Christians. And so many people don't realize that as Palestinian Christians, we descend from the first followers of Jesus Christ himself. So the misconception that a lot of Australians have is that being a minority in Palestine, that we are discriminated by Muslims. And I said that couldn't be further from the truth. It was indeed Muslims and Christians trying to defend our towns and villages when the Zionist militias were going through and depopulating them. My grandparents, they fled their homes by force in 1947. And both of my parents were born in Lebanon, and my father went to America, my mother went to Australia, and they happened to meet at a wedding in Canada. And hence I was born in the US and came to Perth when I was 3 months old and grew up here. Emphasizing that Christians and Muslims have been living side by side together for literally centuries, and sends the message that it's actually the Zionists that are causing the oppression that you see today, unlike what mainstream media or Zionist propaganda usually tells us. I find that this message is something which has been missing out of the mainstream media, and Christians, Palestinian Christians, by far and large, have been left out of the picture, and hence the creation of Palestinian Christians in Australia. I hope we can aim to dispel a lot of these misconceptions. One of the messages that I like to put out there, and I think in solidarity that we should be doing this, is discussing the root of the conflict, which is all about demographics. Because from 1882 to the Balfour Declaration in 1917, our Jewish cousins made up 8% of the population. And in order to establish a Jewish state, that would require rearranging these ratios. So because you cannot have a country when you are you cannot have a country that identifies as Jewish when you are less than 51% of the population, because if you're not over 51% of the population, the non-Jews will vote in non-Jewish members of parliament and cabinet and everything. So when I try to explain the root of the conflict, I say that the Zionist goal was to create a Jewish demographic majority, and they could have only done so by displacing and depopulating over 490 non-Jewish towns and villages. This is the message which no Zionist that I have come across has an answer to, because they know that it is the truth. And that is the goal of Zionism, regardless of how it is defined. Many of them like to say that it is simply a movement for Jewish liberation and self-determination, but they leave out the part when this is implemented in practice, it necessitates creating a Jewish demographic majority where one doesn't exist naturally. And you see what is happening in Sheikh Jarrah, you see what is happening throughout the West Bank. In 1967, when Israel captured those two territories, it didn't annex these parts of the land because between the river and the sea, the population ratios from Jews to non-Jews is about 50-50. And if they were to annex and give everybody citizenship, then that would create an uncomfortable demographic ratios and Zionism wouldn't be able to exist. So how it is defined is that Zionism seeks to create a Jewish demographic majority and to preserve a Jewish demographic majority because it's already done so within the borders of Israel. And that is continually what they are doing in the West Bank. And I think that if we can explain this to the rest of the world, specifically that point, no one can argue, or there is no way that they could twist the message, because each and everyone knows that this is true, and that no one can agree with purposely making a majority into a minority. This is an important message that I believe needs to be put out, and a key talking point that all of us in solidarity should be explaining to the rest of the world. So back to where I engage with my Christian identity, learning about the plight of the Palestinians and knowing that my ancestry comes from the first followers of Jesus Christ, I think it is essential that each and every one of us work towards providing continuity to our rich culture that has existed in the land since the times of Christ. And it is my pleasure to be able to share this perspective with each and every one of you. And thank you so much for all of your attendance.